Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Munk Innovation Policy Lab 4.0 session. It's my delight to welcome you here for this panel on science to entrepreneurship and what promises to be a very fruitful discussion. My name is Sarah Lubick. I'm SFU's Director of Entrepreneurship, and that means that I'm part of SFU's innovation strategy to unleash the entrepreneurial mindset and create the conditions for impact. But I also come about this as a tech and science entrepreneur, so I'm even more excited and have spent some time with the federal government around their innovation strategy. And we have so many experts here to take these questions from so many different angles that I will be brief in my intro so you can get to all of the amazing people that we have with you today. The purpose of this panel is to explore the programs and skills required to spark the entrepreneurial mindset and behaviors in scientists and in entrepreneurs, in scientists and in tech entrepreneurs. So this is a particularly important discussion because for those of us on the academic side, a lot of the academic entrepreneurship literature has focused on technology transfer and not necessarily skills and programs. And for those of us who are on the program side, a lot of our programs have been very much focused towards digital tech and the kind of tech that can be addressed with lean startup methods. And this leaves significant room for the kind of science and tech that can change the world, but often takes quite considerably different pathways and more complex ecosystems. So I'm joined today by Fabiano Armelini, who is from the École de Polytechnique in Montreal, Sophie Velou at Laval, Alicia Main at Simon Fraser University, and Sherry Bredsnitz from the Munk School at U of T. So how it's going to work today is that I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give a 5-6 minute intro on what they're doing at the moment and also how they see science tech entrepreneurship so we can start getting a breadth of all we're looking at. After that, we'll be immediately taking Q&As from the audience, and I have some questions myself. So we will have a very fruitful discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Fabiano to please tell us about all that you're doing and how you see science and tech entrepreneurship.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you for the introduction, and hello everyone, welcome to this webinar. First of all, I'd like to say that I'm honored to be part of this panel full of competent women. I'm the only man around the table here, so please be indulgent with me. If I say something that is not up to the level of the discussion, please apologize, I'm just a man. So jokes apart, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and then talk about the topic. So Fabiano Armelini, I'm associate professor at Polytechnique Montreal for 7 years now. Before that, I work in the industry as a product engineer and also as an entrepreneur. I have co-founded 2 companies in Brazil, where I come from. When I was the first professor hired at Polytechnique whose position had the label entrepreneurship on it, which is quite relevant to the discussion we're going to have here. Now we have doubled, we have 2 professors. But anyway, it's a great challenge. Before arriving here, I have never done research on entrepreneurship. My research is more on innovation, product development. Although I have some research going on the topic now, what I want to share with you is more on this personal experience I've been having in including entrepreneurship in engineering education. So the very position, my position at Polytechnique is the result of a rising awareness of the school, which is an engineering school, for those who do not know, that it should be doing something about entrepreneurial education. Okay, for the 7 years, I have been involved in the whole process of developing a program and developing this rising awareness. So what we have elaborated a strategic plan. We have created an office for entrepreneurship support, which now comes with 10 people working on it. We have improved our offer of courses, coaching programs for our entrepreneur students and also for external entrepreneurs who want to collaborate with us. And one of the greatest obstacles that I have personally faced in this process is to find our place in the sun. In the local entrepreneurship ecosystem, because we have a business school right here around the corner, and entrepreneurship is normally a subject that is treated in this kind of school. So the first question I'm asked internally and externally is, okay, how do you distinguish yourself from what it's being done at HEC Montréal, our business school right here on the corner? And well, the answer for this question I have been refining over the years. One thing is clear, our vocation is on techno entrepreneurship because we are an engineering school, of course. But the question is, and that's the question that's not easy to answer, is what is techno entrepreneurship? Conventional entrepreneurship also uses technologies nowadays. So I cannot say, okay, it's all ventures that use technologies, because nowadays from different measures, everyone is doing technology or is using technology. So that's not what defines a technological venture. It's not also developing technology or just, okay, researching spin-offs, because for that we have another label, scientific entrepreneurship, which technical entrepreneurship is part of, but is not the whole of technical entrepreneurship. So what it is, what I often say is that what makes a new venture, a technological startup, is the fact that you need to develop something new, whether it's a new product, a new service, or a new platform, in order to deliver your value proposition to your customer. Then conventional entrepreneurship, you have a more or less linear process where you define a need. From that, you go look for the product that very often already exists. You are just customizing perhaps or adapting to your own needs. And then you go design your business model, which you will find the best fit between your offer and your customer. In tech entrepreneurship, to start with, it's not always that you start by the need. In the case of scientific entrepreneurship is when you have a technological breakthrough. So you have a solution and you're looking for a problem. So it's quite the opposite. But that's another topic. Even if you're in a tech entrepreneurship that starts by the need, it doesn't follow the linear process that I have just described. So you don't go look for a product that already exists. You need to create your own products. And then you have some hypothesis that it might work with a given client that you assume that has a need, and then you build a business model and you test it. And then quite often you see that it does not work, and the ways to improve is not just changing the business model. Sometimes you need to change the product, sometimes you need to change the business models, and quite often you need to change both at the same time. So to make a long answer short, what makes technological entrepreneurship is this process where you develop your business needs, your business model, and your products simultaneously. This is in my opinion, what is technical entrepreneurship. So I've gone through more than my 6 minutes, so I'm sorry about that, Sarah. I give you back the word, and thank you once again for being part of this panel.
Thank you so much. And don't worry, I was timing you, and you were right on 6 minutes, so it was very well done.
Okay, thank you.
So with that, Sophie, can you tell us about how you view tech entrepreneurship and the exciting things that you're doing?
Sure. So welcome, everyone. I'm really glad to be with you. I'm a professor of technology and international entrepreneurship at Laval University, which means that I teach both science and engineering students how to launch a business in biopharmaceuticals, optics, and IT. And what's specific about my classroom is that I have those students that are really specialized in science and engineering, but I also have some business students in my class. So what we hope is that it's going to make a successful entrepreneurial team with people with both expertise, meaning science and business. So my research is mainly about the growth and internationalization processes of high-tech firms. And what I would like to add to the complexity of technology entrepreneurship that Fabiano talked about is the international dimension. So we know that in that kind of entrepreneurship, which is science-based, we are dealing with international issues. So we have to be aware, be proactive, be alert, and also know who can help us overcome all the issues that might come up with such level of complexity. So in terms of being aware, it means that we will have, as an entrepreneur, to see all the different activities that we will have in our business and to see which one of them could gain some competitive advantage of being international. For example, we know that R&D is going on at a global level. So we do a lot of R&D partnership with people from other countries. We do conferences, we presentation in foreign countries, but it also means that we will have to protect our intellectual property in different countries. At the sourcing level, we know there's a lot of shortage right now in terms of equipment, but also in terms of the parts we need to build our technology, which will become a product. So we have to know how it's working and how we can get those different parts. So this is another level of complexity. Even though our entrepreneurs don't want to produce right away in foreign countries, once again, they need to know the players. So who are the best, where they are located, how does it work, in order to make the right decision at the right time and to plan accordingly. Of course, we are aiming at niche-oriented market, so we want to make sure that we have a successful return on our R&D investment. So to do that, we have to target specific niche in different countries to have a sufficient market. And that again increase the level of complexity. Once we are aware of all that, we want to be alert, looking at both the science and business issues that are going on in the world. So we have to keep informed and to build our international network, because it doesn't appear right away in a second. So we have to build it throughout our development process. The people that are in our lab, our colleagues, are the tomorrow's leaders that are going to be working around the world. So we need to keep in touch. We also have to build our local network, because they are the ones that could help us out in getting in foreign countries later on. And to help us do all that, we have, of course, our university lab that can help us with the prototype, that could help us also with the university incubator to build our business model. And there's also the transition that will be smoothed down by our university incubator to an accelerator that will be specialized and help us get in touch with people from different countries to do our commercialization. Well, thanks, Sarah. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. And I hope we get to pick up on that international flavor as we go through the Q&A, because as we know, we're not that big a country population-wise, and we need to be thinking international right away. But we have a bad habit of thinking the international market is the United States. So, and that's it. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that in the ensuing discussion. And Alicia, how about you?
Thank you, Sarah, and what a delight to be part of this panel and this very important discussion this morning. I'm already learning things about my colleagues and activities in other sides of the country. I'm Alicia Main. I'm the Van Dusen Professor of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Simon Fraser University at the SFU Beatty School of Business, where I've been for 21 years, so my LinkedIn profile tells me recently. There I am also academic director of a program that I founded called Invention to Innovation, based on research of my colleagues and I in science innovation and science entrepreneurship. And I am special advisor to our VP Research and International on innovation, in which capacity I lead the SFU Innovates pan-university strategy to try to unlock more invention and research-based innovation. So I want to touch on a few points this morning in this time that we have, and then hopefully later in the questions. One is the huge potential that we have in Canada from our incredible level of invention when looked internationally, when compared internationally. Our scientists, our engineers, our scholars across the board rank in the top 1% of cited publications, far more than we should for if you were looking proportionally at the research dollars employed. We have pockets of world-leading excellence. And sadly, on the innovation side, we don't meet that same lofty standard. So again, compared to our OECD competitors, comparators, that's what I meant to say, we fall down in all of the surveys over the last 30 years, looking at invention metrics versus innovation metrics. So we're sitting on this huge potential. And we've seen in the pandemic recently just how important inventions at universities and the spin-offs fueled by university inventions are to solving global problems. University research is vitally important in health. It's vitally important to solving the clean energy transition and climate solutions and across a wide range of breakthrough invention. So how do we mobilize that better? So our research, my research is in science innovation and science entrepreneurship, particularly in deep tech. And we founded at SFU, and I would say at SFU BD, but it's really across the university. We founded the Invention to Innovation program, I2I program, in 2015. We took it to Senate and did all the things that one has to do within a university and had the champions that one has to have, one of whom is now a president of our university, in order to launch a program that's not a moneymaker for a business school, but was serving both the university across faculties and the ecosystem. And so this program focused on graduate STEM scientists and engineers and on postdoctoral fellows. And it has expanded to also focus on professors. We get about 3 professors per year in our 4-credit program, several of whom have been Canada Research Chairs, who are eager to go and find out how to make more impact with their breakthrough research. We also, 3 years ago, partnered with MyTax in order to put some of this programming material into asynchronous format and to offer it more broadly across the country. And this year, I'm proud to say that that program is offered from coast to coast, from Victoria to Halifax and St. John. And we've had partners in different areas of the country. We've had partnerships with Queen's University, with Dalhousie, and with Memorial in trying to offer this, but it's open to any HQP across the country. And the idea is, again, to unlock some of that potential by allowing scientists and engineers who have ideas that are creating new opportunities, to the points that Fabiano made about these processes happening together, to allow them to have the mindset to make early stage decisions and to engage in activities, be it around IP, be it around market prioritization, be it around finding co-founders, even before ventures are formed. And sometimes when ventures aren't going to be formed, there's going to be other ways to make impact with their research, but to focus on that and unlocking that potential. And at the same time, we study this area, and we study ventures, including ones that responded to the pandemic, and have seen what a difference these pre-formation entrepreneurial capabilities can have. We've seen scientist entrepreneurs who are very, very good at it, and that endow their ventures with a better chance of success. And the good news is these skills can also be taught, even if you don't happen to land in the research lab of a very prolific exemplar scientist entrepreneur. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. I would say, to the point that Sophie made about the role of the research labs that we have in our universities, I think that they can play a big role. I think it is not just the scientist, it's the ecosystem, that they're surrounded with. And I'm hoping that the discussion goes in that direction of things that we can do, not only through our education programs, but also through our ecosystem, to unlock more of our outstanding STEM innovation potential.
That's fantastic. And I'll make a note of that for potential topics down the line, but I see that we're already getting Q&A, so we'll see where that goes. And Sherry, do you want to finish up with the introductions, and we can start doing Q&A, because I already have a million things I want to talk to you guys about.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah. My name is Sherry Bresnitz. I'm an associate professor at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy and a member of the Innovation Policy Lab. And I am also the director of the Masters in Global Affairs at the Munk School. My research initially started as an economic geographer by focusing on the role of universities and how universities contribute to economic development. And very, very quick, it focused on commercialization and where universities contribute to commercialization. And over the years, I looked at different aspects of university policy and culture and organization, looking at TTOs. But you realize when you talk about universities and you talk just mostly about faculty and researchers, you miss an entire big part of the university, which is our students. Our students are, and if you look at numbers, they are the entrepreneurs, right? And we tend to ignore that, partly because as universities, it's hard for us to count it, right? Because there's no way really to follow that. But also because we can't service all of them, right? And even looking at the, hearing the amazing programs that our colleagues were talking about, we tend, again, to focus on engineering or, STEM students because they have a product or there's technology. And one of the things we've been talking here at Arts and Sciences is, in fact, what happens with students that do, educational programs or, social entrepreneurship? Where do they fit in this entire thing? And so through all of this, there's a few things that I've seen and researched over time in different universities, not just at U of T, but one is, what do we give our students, right? What are we providing them in order to make them better entrepreneurs, right? So let's say they're not in a business program. Where do they get any kind of entrepreneurship approach if they're not PhD students? So we have accelerators, incubators and accelerators, and more universities have more. U of T has 11 of them, which always shocks me when I say that. We do teach for entrepreneurship, but again, it's very specific programs. They're very niche, very, very small. We do some teaching of entrepreneurship in accelerators. And again, some of them do it better than others. And the big part, which I think U of T has been very active on in the last couple of years, is the IP education. Teaching students and faculty, for that matter, that IP is important. I think in Canada, so being non-Canadian, moving here and accepting the Canadian approach, we want science to be public, but the world doesn't play fair. And so, when you talk to Americans, they're, who invented insulin, right? Nobody talks about Canada when they talk about that, right? So there's a point of teaching our students that IP is important, and IP is not just patents. IP is copyright and trademarks and all of these things that they go like, oh, I didn't even know about that, right? So, I'm going to leave it at that. I think there's a lot of good things to talk about there, and I'm really excited to hear more and hear the questions that people are asking. So back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. And I love that insight of who are we building these programs for? And does everyone, I feel there's also an inclusivity lens to that of, who is dominant in the disciplines that we're aiming our entrepreneurship training at, and does that need to be? So with that, we already have a question in the Q&A, and please, to the audience, use the Q&A chat to put your questions up for our awesome panelists. So first question we have is wondering if there's a difference between how we treat technology entrepreneurship for undergraduates and graduate students. And I have opinion on this myself, but I'll hold that for a moment. And why don't I start with Fabiano, because you talked about the undergraduate level as well, but then I know that everyone on the panel will probably have an opinion on this. So I'll go from there.
Well, that's a very good question. I'm still looking for a good answer, but anyway, One thing is for sure that there is something that I always teach in the undergraduate course that I say, okay, my goal with you is not that you start your business the day after, is that you learn how to synchronize your antennas with opportunities, because the opportunities might come next year, might come in 5 years, might come in 10 years. But for undergraduate, I'm not concerned about knowing what they have as a material. So like, okay, let's explore that. We are more on the, rising awareness, making them think more entrepreneurial, even as an entrepreneur, so it's really about forming capabilities, competence, knowing to think as an entrepreneur. For graduate students, we have formed here a workshop, a one-credit workshop for our PhD students that think that perhaps their PhD projects might have a business potential. So it's a small cohorts of 8-10 students. They come with their PhD project and say, hey, I'm doing that, and then I try to build with them the business model around this idea. So you see, one thing is different is that our graduate students are more mature. They do have something, technologically speaking, to offer to society already very often. So we can start with that and then build entrepreneurial capabilities around it. But for undergraduate, for me, it's more building capabilities and changing the mindset and making them think more entrepreneurs. So yeah, that would be my part of the answer. I don't know if anyone wants to complete that.
Yes, well, if you don't mind, I'll call on Alicia, because I know that mindset comes very quickly up in the eye to eye as well, and that's a graduate student program. So do you want to build on what Fabiano was saying?
Yes, so I would say I like what Fabiano said on trying to build capabilities that are going to serve these students and these alumni, throughout their careers, and they're going to serve in the innovation ecosystem. Some of them are going to become, people in industry who are, able to help our receptor capacity from university innovation. But I would say that in my experience, the focus on undergrad and graduate is very different. When I've tried to have undergraduate students come into the program that we've designed for graduate STEM students, it hasn't been a great fit. And they're very important programs for both, but I would say that graduate students and STEM PhD and postdocs and STEM faculty are this incredible resource that we've spent so much money on in our science innovation ecosystem, in our R&D funding, and who represent such big potential, very deep expertise in a certain area, and that they learn differently and they're motivated differently. And my experience has been, and as you know, Sarah, that experiential learning around the invention and the research areas that are happening in the lab of those HQP unlocks numbers of things at the same time. It's their mindset that you're building for various paths that they may take in the innovation ecosystem. And it's also actually real-time building commercialization strategy for university research. It can affect the whole culture of their own lab. So I think, and that's overkill for an undergrad who hasn't had that experience and doesn't have that deep capability in one area, those 10,000 hours, of the tipping point.
Right. So you're, yes, building on even more capabilities and building out more, unleashing even more potential on that commercialization, or like in the short term. Because I don't want to say that undergrads have less potential, but for the lab.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, Sophie, and we're starting to get lots and lots of questions, so I'm not going to go to everyone for every question. So if people want to hop up and down and be like, no, I want to answer that one first, please do. If not, Sophie, I know in our pre-talk, you talked about working at the undergrad, grad, and PhD level. So I'm wondering if you wanted to build on that before we go to the next question.
Yes, I would add maybe one thing is that it depends on the industry in which the students are aiming to build their business. For example, I would see in my undergrad class that there are more students that are willing to start a business in IT or in other innovative industry. So they want to build a technology that will be useful to some other technology. While in my graduate students, I will see more people in either photonics or health science. And that has to do with the level of expertise that is needed to build our business, but also the product development cycle. So if we want to build a vaccine, it will take much more competences and much more time. So we expect we will have more graduate students, with even some of them have a PhD and a postdoc and are still taking entrepreneurship classes. While in our undergraduate classes, we have students that want to start a business in either video games, they want to start apps, so their interests are different. So that's why we change a little bit the focus of our classes. But the idea is always to build a entrepreneurial culture within the university, to give them the opportunity to consider entrepreneurship as a career path, and also to know about the ecosystem that is there to support them whenever they're ready to launch their business.
I really like how you are meeting students where they are and where their passions are and where their dreams are. And the next question, I'm going to ask Sherry to start, because you talked about the difference between disciplines and where we focus. And the question is there a difference between teaching technology entrepreneurship in an engineering school and in a business school? And so I feel that interdisciplinary has come up as a side theme in a number of the things we've talked about already. So do you mind if we start with you?
Sure, though I don't teach entrepreneurship in either. So I'm just going to say that so I think this is really one for Sophie and Fabiano, but I want to say that when you look at the research on STEM versus non-STEM students, right? STEM students tend to get jobs, so they don't automatically become entrepreneur. You actually need that combination of STEM and non-STEM students, and that's where the business students come in. So if you look at our latest studies looking at U of T alumni, you find that the startups, the entrepreneurs, are the combinations, are the business school students that also have, let's say, some STEM background, or the opposites, students that studied commerce and then they moved into engineering. It's pretty interesting on that level. And I think because they need both aspects of the knowledge to become an entrepreneur, and part of it is maybe going back to Alicia's point, is where they are in their life cycle, right? And they have some experience and they've seen some of this process, either because they worked in a startup or they were part of a startup group, but they weren't necessarily the entrepreneurs themselves initially.
I love that. We have a tech entrepreneurship program here where we're deliberately mixing all of the other disciplines with engineering, and you get amazing things, but you actually have to first teach them not to kill each other and to actually understand each other. And I think that idea of early stage culture change is going to continue to be a theme here. With that, Fabiano, I see you have taken yourself off mute, so I'm going to assume that you want to talk.
Yeah. Well, as Shira has never, all my teaching experience in business schools are more punctual interventions at courses. Sophie has invited me to go to her university some years ago. I teach more for engineers, but what I'm going to share is a discussion I have with my colleagues from HEC. I have a very good relationship with the Department of Entrepreneurship at HEC Montreal, and Luis Cisneros, the director. We very often we discuss a little bit. And once he told me something, I say, hey, Fabiano, we need you from Polytechnic, because a lot of students from Polytechnic come here to follow our accelerator programs and so on. But we have a tendency to consider the product that they come with as a black box, and we work just the business model. We know that sometimes the good ways to change the product, but since we don't have the competence to do it, we work too much on the business model and not too much on the product. And engineering school is the opposite. We look too much at the box, the product, and we forgot to look, okay, what is the application of that? So we fall in love with the solution we have just created, and we don't care if there is a good business model behind it, if there is a client that is interested on that. So when you're teaching for engineers, you need to stress business, look at the client, don't fall in love with your product. And when you go to business school, you have to say, hey, it's not just about business. You need to make sure that the offer, sometimes the way to improve it is to change the offer, not to change the business model. There's no miracle you can do that. So that would be my answer to that question.
I think that's an incredibly important point to make. Alicia, I see that you were also off mute. Does that mean that you wanted to comment?
No.
Okay. All right. So actually, I'm going to throw to you next, though, because one of the questions in the chat follows some of the things that have been brought up around culture change, but particularly for something that focuses on labs. Giving entrepreneurship skills to graduate students is very important, but sometimes they might not have the support of their supervisors to explore them. How can we bring in supervisors to the conversation? How can we help supervisors understand the value for their students to gain these kinds of skills? Question end. Yeah. Can I please start with you, Alicia?
Great, thank you. I think supervisors are a huge piece of the equation, particularly for graduate students. And my experience has been mainly with STEM. And I think it's because the program that we developed was basically about unlocking science innovation. So that's the kind of students who really benefited the most from it. I fully agree that you need to have business linked into there and co-founders, but in the stage where we're trying to provide mindset, it's very early stage. And so it's often passing them on to another program afterwards where they meet the next business people. And so I would say the supervisors are really important, because these grad students, they're embedded in the lab of a supervisor. There could be, a lab that's as many as 20 grad students. The supervisor is the person who is signaling what's okay to spend your time on. And when we first developed this program and took it to Senate, of course, we had to do some polling of supervisors and of grad students, finding out if there was, a need for the program, what kind of barriers and constraints, if people were going to vote for it in the Senate. And I had a physics professor, a supervisor, a PI, who wrote back and said, "Are you kidding? Are you going to take my grad students out of my lab every Wednesday night? Like, what are you thinking?" And, it's like, oh, poor grad student. But that same PI came to an event that we held a few years later and was a huge convert. She could see what it was doing for the grad students. She could see that there was actually an advantage back to their research lab, that their translational grants were more successful, and that she had, another person that could help write those translational grants. And so I do think that actually making sure that the supervisors understand what's in it for their research impact to have their graduate students get this training, as well as that it's something that is going to serve them well in their career. And I wanted to add to Sherry's point, whereas I fully agree that people that have a tech, education in the tech sector have an easier time getting employment, that gets less true as you go on to the PhD. And so, we're finding, and reports from the Canadian Council of Academies, et cetera, find that a shocking number of our PhD graduates in Canada aren't getting tenure track jobs, but secondly, aren't even getting jobs in industry that are commensurate with their experience. And ideally, we'd like those grads to be leading innovation in industry and become our receptor capacities and bridges to universities. And to do so, we have to equip them. And it does start with the supervisor.
Thank you, Alicia. And you answered another question in the chat while you were at it, so that worked out very well. Sherry, do you want to comment on that one as well? Because I know your expertise goes there too.
Yeah, so I think there's two issues here. I think Alicia is correct, is about you have to bring the supervisor in. So they, even if you think about faculty commercialization, the success of inventions going through and becoming successful innovation is whether the faculty actually bought in, whether they're chaperoning this invention through the process, right? And it's the same thing for the students. But we also have to understand that most faculty did not go into universities because they wanted to be entrepreneurs, right? So, we have that problem. We need to make sure, though, that they do have the information to provide the students. So even if, let's say, take that faculty before they were changed, to be able to say, look, I'm not the person, but Alicia has this amazing program. Maybe you should, if you're interested in this, you should go there. And I think we still don't have that information in most universities, right? So if a lot of times, if the faculty decided that they're not interested, then, the students get the signal that it's not interesting, but they also don't provide them with the tools where to go. And if we are good and we have, accelerators that can provide that knowledge, maybe outside of the lab, or programs that can provide this information. So at least we have support for students, or at least knowledge, what's the next step, or who do you need to go and talk to? Because a lot of times things fall apart because they didn't even get the information of, I don't know where to go. Universities are huge, they don't even know which office they're supposed to contact, right? So I think the knowledge and providing this knowledge to faculty, whether they want to supervise the students through commercialization or not, but at least providing them with information of where to go to, in order to learn to become better in entrepreneurship is important.
I think that's so critical. We talk about it at SFU, never dropping anyone off of a cliff. And that is, it's not great if we rev them up and get them all excited and then say, I got nothing for you now, and I don't even know where to point you. That's not fair. So one of my questions, and if you don't mind, I think I'll start with Sophie. Oh, actually, Sophie, did you want to answer that question? I saw your mic go off.
Well, I would simply add that there are some supervisors that are really good at it, and they succeeded many times before. So these are the ones that we can use as ambassadors to explain to their colleagues how to do it and why do they do it and how is it useful for their lab. For example, some students are coming into graduate studies to change the world. They want to have that big technology that will bring some good to the world. So they have in mind that maybe someday they're going to launch their business, and they will choose their lab regarding the kind of supervisor that they want. If there's a supervisor that is well known and has previous success in startups, well, it might attract them. So some supervisor would tell you that they like to do it because they like the energy that they have in their lab, because it brings a certain personality trait in their graduate students, and it gives a good energy in their lab, and that's one of the reasons why they're doing it also.
Absolutely. Who you choose makes a huge difference. And I've spoken to deans who said, we don't have enough entrepreneurship in our faculty. Why not? And I said, well, do you hire for entrepreneurial people? And they're like, oh, well, there would be one place to start. Speaking of graduates with scientific backgrounds, and if you don't mind, Sophie, I'm going to call back to you again. What are your thoughts on programs to help graduates with scientific backgrounds that want to create ventures, but perhaps are not necessarily within the university laboratory? So what do you do with people who have already graduated?
Well, there are incubators and accelerators that could be helpful for that. Some are specialized in different industries, or some are more general if there's not an incubator that's really specialized in the industry that people are aiming at. And they have training programs, they have a coach that could help them, they have the infrastructure. So we have all the ecosystem that is already there that could be helpful for people who want to launch their business in science. We see that there's maybe a higher percentage of people that are starting business in science that are coming from the industry. So that's important that they know also where to go. So that's why we're seeing a lot of incubators and accelerators working together to always target the potential entrepreneur to the right organization that could help them. And sometimes they are even joining efforts to give the best program. For example, if the science entrepreneur is located in a rural region, it's possible to have some services there, but also to have some other training and coach that are accessible and that are from other parts of that are nationwide.
That makes such good sense. Bringing in the accessibility angle, and also, of course, we all know that the entrepreneurial journey is never linear. And so you don't know if you spark this mindset and spark this passion in your class, and then 2 years later, now they come across the opportunity they want to work on. So making sure that you have those inroads back into your university and incubators makes all the sense, which is starting to answer some of the culture questions going on in the chat. So I have so many more questions. This is one that I find really fascinating because so often, the KPIs associated with university entrepreneurship are around patents, et cetera. So one of our guests asked, how are entrepreneurship programs for students, how should they be evaluated in universities, or what are the main indicators? And again, I have an opinion, but I want to make sure that I don't color the conversation too much. So Alicia, do you mind if I start with you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I get, to quote a colleague of mine I respect a lot, you get what you measure. Sarah's written a great white paper on this, but I would say that it depends on the program that and what you're trying to create with that particular program. The metrics will change. I would say that in the program that we're developing, we actually care about the HQP's path through different paths, and some of those will be, eventually founding science-based ventures that wouldn't be founded before, that have the degree of the impact that they can have on global issues is important. The fact that they can export globally, but there's going to be a lag. There is also paths are the jobs that they get in industry, and the fact that they've pivoted, and the responsibility they're given in industry, leading new product development or innovation strategies. Another path is translational grants that they start to get, right? And how, to Fabiano's point, how things are changing in the lab and in the product development. So I would say all of those are important. And on that latter point, I think something that you could measure real time, certainly surveys of how capabilities have changed of the people in the program, but I would say real time, you could measure the change in the technology readiness level for STEM, graduate entrepreneurs. I think that's a really important measure, helping that translational path. I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Sherry, do you want to talk a little bit about that too?
Yeah, so if you look at, when we measure success of accelerators, for example, we look at what happened to these firms, right? So we look at growth in number of employees and growth in number of products, right? So, because they're all tiny when they start, and especially when they go into accelerators. And what so I'm thinking about the quote, Alicia. So yes, you measure, you get what you measure. But the point is, so Ontario had a program called, I'm going to CLA program, which is all about creating accelerators for universities, right? And it was about teaching for entrepreneurship. So the mandate was teaching for entrepreneurship. So if we measure whether those accelerators were teaching for entrepreneurship, say all of them passed all around Ontario, no matter which university. But then when you start to see evaluate the quality of these firms, right? Their survival rate, their products, their growth, then you get a different picture. Then you see some of these accelerators are providing better tools for those students and companies than others. And then there's a question, do we want to build on it, right? And say, okay, so we now have a different goal. So Lisa is correct. We're saying we can measure whatever, but if we want to measure success in entrepreneurship, that's pretty defined, right? The entrepreneurship success is not about just learning how to be an entrepreneur, it's actually becoming an entrepreneur. And if we go even deeper than this, if you're taking basing this on what we teach at universities, so we're becoming a company that's related to the topic that the students studied, then it's even more specific, right? So there are ways to measure it, and we know that there are programs that are better than others. And some of it is based on who runs the program. So serial entrepreneurs running the program or having them mentor or involved in the accelerator is important. Actually having a selection process. So, we have some accelerators that just accept everybody, but having a selection process is important. And the third thing is actually having a program. So not just come to our accelerators, we are fun, we're going to help you, but you actually have to go through this program, and the program has goals and you have to achieve certain things over time. That's a totally different kind of a program than come here and come to listen to lectures and meet people and have a network, right? So I think that is pretty true to every article I read about entrepreneurship in general and about student and faculty entrepreneurship specifically.
Fantastic. So I'm going to ask Fabiano, because we have a program, the Tech Entrepreneurship Program here. We look at it and go, you might start a company, you might not start a company, but if you have developed an entrepreneurial mindset, you developed interdisciplinary teams that haven't killed each other, that was a win. So whatever you go on and do after that. So how do you guys look at it?
I'm going to answer this question, but first I'm just adding to what Shiri and Alicia just said on how do we measure the performance. I totally agree with Alicia. We should adequate the measure with the goals of the program, the program goals. And in our case, in the undergraduate students in an engineering school, for us, I have discussed that with our office here. How could we measure if we did a good job in making our students more entrepreneurs? And three things that I remember from that discussion is that, well, one thing that we should measure is, did we rise the intention of entrepreneurship in our students? So that would be, say, okay, we did a job on awareness. So now they think of entrepreneurship as an option. So that would be a good thing. But just an intention is not enough. So we should also follow the students after they graduate to see if we have an increase of the rates from intention to action to be an entrepreneur. So that's harder to measure. But anyway, we're just hypothetically discussing how to measure that. And in engineering school, well, since we have zero entrepreneurial skills in the program, so can we measure how we have developed more entrepreneurial skills? No, especially interpersonal skills, business skills. So having basis on marketing, basis on other stuff. Then, of course, it's important in engineering school that you are able to design a bridge that does not fall. That's the ultimate goal of an engineering school. But these other skills are also more and more important for our students. So now going back to your questions, yes, we do consider here that corporate entrepreneurship is one possible exit for our students. So what we do in our courses, undergrad courses, we really dedicate one session just to talk about entrepreneurship programs. So how can you use entrepreneurial skills as an employee, and how can you later on become an entrepreneur or a partner of your former company by that? So we do focus a little bit on that, because we know that for a lot of our students, that's going to be their experience, their actual experience with entrepreneurship.
That's definitely important to think about, especially at the undergrad where you're not sure what they're going to do later on. Now, there's a really very kind comment in the comment section, first saying how much they're enjoying the panel, but at the end of the question, there is, what is the role of language in recruitment to new innovators? And do we need to be revisiting our language? And I know that we at SFU, we've been looking at this, and very much shaped by a book I was reading called Metaphors We Live By, and the power of the language that you use. And Sophie, you had talked about these different disciplines early on. So do you mind if I start with that question, how you use the right language to recruit these kind of students?
Well, I believe that if we use a language of skills and of dreams, because we know that when people are starting a business, if they have a growth intention at the beginning, they will keep it. But if they don't have it when they start a business, that's not going to appear somehow. So it's to make people dream about what they could do, if what they dream to achieve, and the skills that they need to acquire. And then the skills that we're going to build with them are going to be useful, whether if they start their business or if they go work in a startup or if they go work in another firm, they will be maybe entrepreneurs. So we need them to have the skills, the leadership to do it. Another thing about language is whatever they start a business or not, they need to be able to explain how a technology is useful, not only how it works, but how it is useful. So if they end up working in a large firm and they have to sell the technology, they have to make a sales pitch to an investor, well, they are able to adapt their language to the people they are speaking. So that's why having students that are both from business and science together, it helps them use the right language and to translate the technology into words that people from the general population will understand. So I would make that the big difference between how does it work and how is it useful.
I think I'm going to try to borrow that in future, looking at skills and dreams. Alicia, I see that you have your mic off, so I know that you're going to want to comment on that as well.
Yes, I couldn't agree more with Sophie, and the idea of looking at what they want to accomplish and their visioning, and giving them that language, and that being an important goal, and actually something that we should be trying to capture as a metric of what these students and HQP are getting out of these programs. But I'd also say that the language of how you talk to the people that you would like to attract to this training, you would like to equip with these skills, is really important. About 2/3 of the people that come into the I2I and the MyTax I2I programs for innovation skills would never walk into a business school or an accelerator. And in fact, many of them actually will tell us after a few weeks that they thought business was evil, and they think about it like a Dilbert cartoon. And so the language, one, is going to them, going to their research areas. I often give a research lecture from my research and then talk about the skills that these scientists may have employed, and then say, by the way, there's a training program that these can, that you're welcome to join, and that are, that are sponsored. But the language that I think appeals to these highly talented scientists and engineers is making impact from their research. And that's true whether you start a startup or whether you are able to better position your idea, to frame it in the language that, as you suggest, Sophie, and as you find in how it's useful to be able to partner with strategic alliance partners, to be able to be more successful in getting translational research funding, but also in making that useful, that those experiments that are translational experiments. So I think the framing about creating impact is very powerful with, with some of our HQP in Canada.
I think this is leaving it at impact and dreams and unlocking potential is probably an excellent place to start wrapping up this really impressive and inspirational discussion. And if you put a question in the chat and we didn't get to it, I'm sorry, we only had so much time, but clearly we've sparked a lot of food for thought, and there's a really good chance that all of our panelists will get some outreach to continue the discussion. This has been such a cool way to talk about not just the importance of science and tech entrepreneurship and how we need to be focusing on this as a country. Often thinking about going international, what the differences are between tech and like digital tech entrepreneurship and what my supervisor used to call stuff you can drop on your foot. And also the science-based entrepreneurship and the complexities that are dealing with business model complexities, scientific complexities, scale-up complexities, technology complexities all at once, but needing to be able to create those ecosystems and creating those conditions. And all of our panelists have done such amazing, inspiring work to start to craft and shift those ecosystems. And we need this for our country. We need this for the world to solve big problems. And I love, just back to what Sophie and Alicia were talking about, our students also need this because it gives them the potential to unlock the impact they want to make and to unlock their dreams. So investing in this kind of entrepreneurship is a win for everybody. So I wanted to say a huge thank you to our panelists who've lent so much inspiration and insight. And I'm sure we'll be getting lots of outreach now to be talking about the amazing things they're doing. And a huge thank you to the Munk Innovation Policy Lab 4.0, because this has been such a delight to be able to host. So thank you all so much, and we will wrap up.
Oh, and thank you, Sarah, for the amazing work as a moderator.
Oh,
Thank you, Sarah.
thank you very much. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who came out and gave such fantastic questions.